We must educate the world is a romantic imperative extolled by Novalis in Miscellaneous Observations. So that's what I'm doing, or endeavoring to achieve in any respect. 1772 to 1801. Novalis was a philosopher, poet, philosopher, artist extraordinaire. It's hard to convey the depth of my respect and admiration for this person. Indeed, for me personally, he is the historical personage who inspires me the most deeply. But he is neglected as a philosopher and misunderstood. Recent scholarship has shown that there was an attempt to present a particular image of Novalis. And in fact, there is much more to him than the image that was presented. So we will be delving much more into this topic in future, as I have many more Novalis audiobooks yet to be released. So I hope you will enjoy Miscellaneous Observations. See you next time. We seek the absolute everywhere and only ever find things. The theory of language is the dynamic of the spiritual realm. One word of command moves armies. The word liberty, nations. Apprenticeship suits the novice poet. Academic study, the novice philosopher. The academy ought to be a thoroughly philosophical institution. The best kind of apprenticeship is apprenticeship in the art of living. The spirit is perpetually proving itself. We shall never entirely comprehend ourselves, but we will and can do much more than comprehend ourselves. Certain restraints are like the finger positions of a flute player who stops now this hole and now that in order to produce different sounds, but seems to be making random combinations of silent and speaking wholes. The distinction between delusion and truth lies in the difference in their life functions. Delusion lives on truth. Truth bears its life within itself. We destroy delusion as we destroy illnesses, and thus delusion is nothing but logical inflammation or its extinction, enthusiasm or philistinism. The former usually leaves behind an apparent lack of mental power, which can only be redressed by a diminishing series of stimuli, coercive measures. The latter often turns into deceptive vitality, whose dangerous revolutionary symptoms can only be relieved by an expanding series of violent measures. Our entire faculty of perception is like the eye. Objects must pass through opposite mediums in order to correctly appear on the pupil. Experience is the test of the rational and vice versa. The true philosopher observes this clearly enough. However, he does so while conceding the necessity of this result. Death is a victory over the self, which, like all self-conquest, brings about a new, easier existence. What is highest is the most understandable. what is nearest, the most indispensable. It is only through lack of acquaintance with ourselves, becoming no longer accustomed to ourselves, that a kind of incomprehensibility arises that is itself incomprehensible. Miracles alternate with the effects of natural laws. They each limit the other, and together they constitute a whole. They are united in that they complement each other. There is no miracle without a natural event, and vice versa. Nature is the enemy of eternal possessions. Life is the beginning of death. Life is for the sake of death. Death is at once the end and the beginning, at once separation and closer union of the self. Through death, the reduction is complete. We are close to waking when we dream that we are dreaming. The imagination places the world of the future, either far above us or far below, or in a relation of metempsychosis to ourselves. We dream of traveling through the universe. But is it not the universe within ourselves? The depths of our spirit are unknown to us. The mysterious way leads inwards. Eternity with its worlds, the past and future, is in ourselves or nowhere. The external world is the world of shadows. It throws its shadow into the realm of light. At present, this realm certainly seems to us so dark inside, lonely, shapeless. But how entirely different it will seem to us when this gloom is past and the body of shadows has moved away. We will experience greater enjoyment than ever, for our spirit has been deprived. How fortunate are they who in this life were already dreaming of seeing. They will all the sooner be able to support the glory of the other world. How can a person have a sense of something if he does not have the germ of it within himself? The seat of the soul is the point where the inner and the outer worlds touch. Wherever they penetrate each other, it is there at every point of penetration. The life of a truly exemplary person must be constantly symbolic. On this premise, would not every death be a death of expiation? To a greater or lesser extent, of course, and could not several very remarkable conclusions be drawn from this? Whoever seeks will doubt, but genius tells so boldly and surely what it seems to be happening within itself, because it is not hampered in the representation of this, and therefore the representation is not hampered either, but rather its act of contemplation, and that which is contemplated seem to be freely in accord, to combine freely in one work. When we speak of the external world, when we depict real objects, then we are acting as genius does. Thus, genius is the ability to treat imaginary objects like real ones, and to deal with them as if they were real as well. Thus, the talent of representing, of making an exact observation, of describing the observation purposively, is different from genius. Without this talent, one can only half see, and is only half a genius. One can have gifts of genius which, in the absence of that talent, are never developed. None of us would exist at all without the quality of genius. Genius is necessary for everything. But what we usually call genius is the genius of genius. It is the most capricious prejudice to believe that a human being is denied the capacity to be outside himself, to be consciously beyond the senses. He is capable at any moment of being a supra-sensual being. But the more conscious of these circumstances we can be, the more lively, powerful, and ample is the conviction which derives from them, the belief in true revelations of the Spirit. It is not seeing, hearing, feeling. It is a combination of all three, more than all three, a sensation of immediate certainty, a view of my truest, most actual life. Thoughts change into laws, wishes are fulfilled. For the weak person, the fact of this moment is an article of faith. Certain moods are especially favorable to such revelations. Most last only an instant. Few linger. Fewest of all remain. In this respect, there are great differences between people. One is more capable of experiencing revelations than another. One has more sense of them, the other more understanding. The latter kind will always remain in their soft light, even if the former has only intermittent flashes of illumination. They are brighter and more varied. This capacity is also susceptible to illness, which signifies either excessive sense or deficient understanding, or excessive understanding and deficient sense. If a person cannot get any further, he finds help in a powerful pronouncement or action, a swift decision. Shame is probably a feeling of profanation. Friendship, love, and piety ought to be treated with a sense of mystery. One ought to speak about them only in rare, intimate moments, silently agreeing about them. Many things are too delicate to be thought. Even more are too much so to be discussed. Sacrifice of the self is the source of all humiliation, as also, on the contrary, it is the foundation of all true exaltation. No one will ever achieve excellence as an artist who cannot depict anything other than his own experiences, his favorite objects, who cannot bring himself to study assiduously even a quite strange object, which does not interest him at all, and to depict it at leisure, An artist must be able and willing to depict everything. This is how a great artistic style is created. A remarkable characteristic of Goethe's can be observed in his linking of small, insignificant incidents with more important events. He seems not to harbor any other intention than to engage the imagination in a poetic way, with a mysterious kind of game. Here too this extraordinary man has fathomed the secrets of nature and learned a nice artistic knack. Thereby, ordinary life is full of similar incidents. They make up a game which, like all games, ends in both surprise and deception. Several myths of common life rest on the observation of this upside-down connection. So, for instance, bad dreams mean good fortune. Rumors of one's death mean long life. A hare running down the path means ill fortune. Almost all the superstition of the common people rests on interpretation of this game. The highest task of education is to take command of one's transcendental self, to be at once the eye of its eye. It is all the less to be wondered at that we lack complete insight and understanding for others. Without perfect self-understanding, one will never learn to truly understand others. I show that I have understood a writer only when I can act in his spirit, when without constricting his individuality, I can translate him and change him in diverse ways. Where imagination and judgment touch, there is wit. Where reason and caprice are coupled, there is humor. In serene hearts, there is no wit. Wit points to disturbed equilibrium. It is at once the result of disturbance and the means of restoration. The most powerful wit is found in passion. Truly sociable wit has no bite. There is a kind which is only a magical play of colors in higher spheres. The condition where all relations are dissolved, despair or spiritual death, is the most terrible kind of wit. Whatever is insignificant, common, rough, ugly, unmannerly, can become socially acceptable only through wit. It exists, as it were, only for the sake of wit. What determines its purpose is wit. We are on a mission. Our vocation is the education of the earth. If a spirit were to appear to us, we would at once take control of our own spirituality. We would be inspired through ourselves and the spirit at the same time. Without inspiration, no spirits can appear. Inspiration is appearance and counter-appearance, appropriation and communication at the same time. The human being continues to live and be active only in the realm of ideas through remembering his existence. At present, there is no other way for spirits to be active in this world Therefore, we have a duty to think of the dead. It is the only way to remain in communion with them. Interest is sympathy with the suffering and activity of another being. Something interests me when it is able to arouse my sympathy. Who could have invented wit? Every characteristic or mode of conduct of our spirit that is consciously reflected upon is in the truest sense a newly discovered world. Man has his being in truth. If he sacrifices truth, he sacrifices himself. We cannot hear enough or speak enough about an endearing object. We are glad about each new pertinent, glorifying word. It is not our doing if it does not become the object of all objects. We cling to lifeless matter because of its connections, its forms. We love matter insofar as it belongs to a beloved being, bears his stamp, or resembles him. A true club is a mixture of institution and society. The objects of social intercourse are nothing but means to enliven it. This determines their choice, their variation, their treatment. Society is nothing but communal living. One indivisible thinking and feeling person. Each human being is a society in miniature. Every beloved object is the center of a paradise. The interesting is not that which sets me in motion for my own sake, but only as a means, as part of a whole. The classical does not disturb me at all. It affects me only indirectly, through myself. It does not exist for me as classical, if I myself do not posit it as something that would not affect me, if I did not determine that I should bring it forth for myself. That would not touch me if I did not tear out a piece of myself and allow this germ to develop in a particular way before my eyes, a development which often needs only a moment, and which coincides with the sense perception of the object, so that I see an object in front of me, in which the common object and the ideal, each permeated by the other, form only one marvelous whole. To find formulas for individual art objects whereby they can be understood in the true sense for the first time constitutes the business of the art critic, whose work is a preparation for the history of art. The more confused a person is, confused people are called blockheads, the more he can make of himself by diligent study of the self. On the other hand, orderly minds must strive to become true scholars, thorough encyclopedists. At first, the confused ones must struggle with massive obstacles. They gain insight only slowly. They learn to work laboriously. But then they are lords and masters forever. The orderly person swiftly gains insight, but also loses it swiftly. He soon reaches the second stage, but usually he stops there. The last steps are laborious for him, and he can rarely succeed in placing himself in the position of a beginner again, once he has attained a certain degree of mastery. Confusion points to excess of strength and capacity, but deficient equilibrium. Precision points to good equilibrium, but meager capacity and strength. This is why the confused person is so progressive, so perfectible, and why, on the other hand, the orderly one comes to a halt so early as a Philistine. To be orderly and precise alone is not to be clear. Through working on himself, the confused person arrives at that heavenly transparency, at that self-illumination, which the orderly person so seldom attains. True genius combines these extremes. It shares swiftness with the last and fullness with the first. Only the individual is interesting. Hence, all that is classical is not individual. The acuity of genius is the acute use of acuity. The true letter is of its nature poetic. Wit, as the principle of affinities, is at the same time the menstruum universal. Witty combinations are, for example, childhood and wisdom, virtue and courtesanship, excess and lack of judgment and naivete, and so on. The human being appears at his most worthy when the first impression of him is the impression of an absolutely witty thought, namely when he appears to be at once spirit and a particular individual. Every outstanding person must seem to be pervaded by a spirit, as it were, which parodies his visible appearance in the ideal. In many a person, this spirit often shows the visible appearance its backside. The impulse towards society is the impulse toward organization. Through this spiritual assimilation, a good society often arises out of common components around an inspired person. The interesting is the material which revolves round beauty. Where there is spirit and beauty, the best of all natures rises high in concentric oscillations. The best thing about learning is its philosophical ingredient, like life in the organic body. Humanity is a comic role. Our old nationality, it seems to me, was truly Roman, naturally because we came into being in just the same way as the Romans, and thus the Roman Empire would truly be a nice, meaningful coincidence. Germany is Rome as a country. The instinctive, universal politics and the ambition of the Romans is also found in the German people. Courts of law, theaters, court, church, government, public meetings, academies, colleges, etc., are, as it were, the special inner organs of the mystical individual of the state. All the chance encounters of our lives are materials from which we can make what we like. Whoever is rich in spirit makes much of his life. Every acquaintance, every incident would be for the thoroughly spiritual person the first element in an endless series, the beginning of an endless novel. There are Germans everywhere. They are general human qualities which have become predominantly general only here and there. Germanness is true popularity and therefore an ideal. A translation is either grammatical, or modifying, or mythical. Mythical translations are translations of the highest kind. They represent the pure, perfected character of the individual work of art. They do not give us the real work of art, but the ideal of it. There still does not exist, I believe, a complete example of such a translation. A mind is needed where the spirit of poetry and the spirit of philosophy have saturated each other in all their fullness. Greek mythology is in part such a translation of a national religion. The modern Madonna, too, is such a myth. Modifying translations, if they are to be genuine, demand the highest poetic spirit. The true translator of this kind must indeed be an artist himself, and be able to produce the idea of the whole at will, in one way or another. He must be the poet of the poet, and thus be able to let him speak according to his own, and the poet's idea at the same time. The genius of humanity stands in a similar relation to each single person. Not only books, but everything can be translated in these three ways. True poetic language should be organically alive. Writings are the thoughts of the state. The archives are its memory. The more our senses are refined, the more capable they become of distinguishing between individuals. The highest sense would be the highest receptivity to the particularity of human nature. Nothing is more indispensable for true religious feeling than an intermediary which connects us to the Godhead. But since so few people are capable at all of a free choice, many an intermediary will become more general, whether by chance, through association, or their particular aptitude for it. This is how national religions arise. The more independent the human being becomes, the more the quantity of the intermediary is diminished, the more the quality is refined, and his relations to it become more diverse, more cultivated. Fetishes, stars, animals, heroes, idols, gods, one God-man. It is irreligion if I accept no mediator at all. True religion is that which accepts that mediator as a mediator, considers him as it were the instrument of the Godhead, as its physical appearance. But on closer observation, true religion seems once more to be antinomically divided into pantheism and antheism. I am taking pantheism not in the usual sense, but understand by the idea that everything could be an instrument of the Godhead, could be a mediator through my raising it to be such. Just as entheism, on the contrary, designates the belief that there is only one such instrument for us in the world, which alone befits the idea of a mediator, and through which alone God can be understood, which I shall thus be compelled to choose through myself, for otherwise entheism would not be true religion. Every object can be a temple for the religious person, in the sense of the augurs. The spirit of this temple is the omnipresent high priest, the entheistic mediator, who alone stands in immediate relation to the All-Father, the basis of all eternal. Attachment is an absolute tendency in all directions. On this rests the power of the hierarchy, of true masonry, and the invisible bond of true thinkers. Herein lies the possibility of a universal republic, which the Romans had begun to realize by the time of their emperors. Almost always the leader, the first servant of the state, has been confused with the representative of the genius of humanity, who belongs to the whole of society or the people. Among the people, as has already been observed, everything is spectacle. It follows that the spirit of the people must also be visible. This visible spirit will come either, as in the millennium, without our help, or it will be chosen unanimously by open or tacit agreement. The priest must not lead us astray. In the beginning, poet and priest were one, and only later ages have separated them. But the true poet has always remained a priest, just as the true priest has always remained a poet. And ought not the future bring the old state of affairs back again? That representative of the genius of humanity could easily be the poet Kat Exochen. But besides, it is an incontrovertible fact that most princes were not actually princes, but usually more or less a kind of representative of the genius of their age, and the government found itself for the most part, as was fitting, in the hands of subordinates. Our everyday life consists of nothing but life-sustaining tasks, which recur again and again. This cycle of habits is only the means to a principal means, that of our whole earthly being, which is a mixture of diverse ways of existing. Their so-called religion merely works as an opiate, stimulating, numbing, alleviating pains by weakening. In the earliest times of the discovery of the faculty of judgment, every new judgment was a find. A law is of its nature effective. An ineffective law is no law. Flight from the common spirit is death. Every specific stimulus betrays a specific meaning. The most intimate community of all knowledge, the republic of learning, is the high purpose of scholars. The fewer the principles, the higher the learning. We usually understand the artificial better than the natural. More spirit is needed for the simple than the complicated, but less talent. In every contact, a substance is created, the effect of which lasts as long as the contact. This is how all synthetic modifications of the individual come about. The more ignorant one is by nature, the more capacity one has for knowledge. Each new insight makes a much deeper, livelier impression. Building worlds is not enough for the mind that reaches more deeply. Yet a loving heart is ample for the spirit that constantly strives. We are related to all parts of the universe as we are to the future and to times past. Which relation we establish as the primary one, which one is primarily important, and which is to become effective for us, depends only on the direction and persistence of our attention. Almost all genius up till now was one-sided, the result of a sickly constitution. The first genius that penetrated itself found here the exemplary germ of an immeasurable world. It made a discovery which must have been the most remarkable in the history of the world, for with it there begins a whole new epoch for humanity, and true history of all kinds becomes possible for the first time at this stage. For the way that had been traversed hitherto now makes up a proper whole that can be entirely elucidated. That point outside the world is given, and now Archimedes can fulfill his purpose. Before abstraction, everything is one, but it is one as chaos is. After abstraction, everything is again unified. But this unification is a free alliance of independent, self-determined beings. A crowd has become a society. Chaos is transformed into a manifold world. If the world is, as it were, a precipitate of human nature, then the world of the gods is a sublimate of it. Both occur uno actu. No precipitation without sublimation. The agility lost there is gained here. Where children are, there is a golden age. The wisdom of storytelling contains the history of the archetypal world. It embraces times past, present, and future. The human world is the common instrument of the gods. Poetry unites them as it does us. That which the external world perceives as quite motionless has the appearance of being quite at rest, however much it may change. In relation to the external world, it always stays at rest. This principle governs all self-modifications. That is why the beautiful appears so much at rest. Everything beautiful is a self-illuminated, perfect individual. Every human form brings to life an individual germ in the beholder. This gaze becomes infinite thereby. It is bound up with a feeling of inexhaustible power, and therefore it vivifies so absolutely. As we behold ourselves, we give ourselves life. Without this visible and tangible immortality, sit venia verbis, we would not truly be able to think. This perceptible inadequacy of the earthly bodily form as the expression and instrument of the spirit dwelling within is the undefined driving thought, which becomes the basis of all true thoughts, the cause of the evolution of intelligence. The more narrow-minded a system is, the more it will please worldly wise people. The art of writing books has not yet been invented, but it is on the point of being invented. Fragments of this kind are literary seedings. Many among them may indeed be sterile, still if only some grow. If the Spirit sanctifies it, then every true book is a Bible. Every individual is the center of a system of emanation. If the Spirit resembles precious metal, then most books are the cheapest coins. Every useful book must at least have a large amount of alloy. In its pure state, precious metal cannot be used for everyday business matters. It is so rare that a book is written for the sake of the book. Many books are longer than they seem. They have indeed no end. The boredom that they cause is truly absolute and infinite. Goethe is now the true representative of the poetic spirit on earth. To describe people has been impossible up to now because what a person is was not known. As soon as what a person is becomes known, it will also be possible to describe the true genesis of individuals. He who wants to hold fragments of this kind to their promise must be an honorable man. Only he is not to pretend to be a poet. Where the majority decides, energy rules over form. It is the converse where the minority has the upper hand. One cannot reproach the political theorists with audacity, as it never occurred to any of them to explore whether monarchy and democracy could and ought to be simply combined as elements of a true universal state. Democracy in the usual sense is not fundamentally different from monarchy, only that then the monarch is a head made up of many minds. True democracy is Protestantism. A political state of nature as Protestantism, in the narrower sense, is a religious state of nature. The moderate form of government is half political entity and half state of nature. It is an artificial, very fragile machine. Therefore, it is highly offensive to all minds of genius, but it is the hobby horse of our time. If the machine could be transformed into a living, autonomous being, then the great problem would be solved. The arbitrariness of nature and the constraint of art permeate each other if they are dissolved in spirit. The spirit makes both of them fluid. The spirit is always poetic. The poetic state is the true perfect state. Nothing is more poetic than memory and premonition, or the conception of the future. The everyday present joins both of these together through limitation. Contiguity comes into being through atrophy, crystallization. But there is a spiritual present which fuses them together through dissolving them. This mixture is the element, the atmosphere of the poet. What is not spirit is matter. Conceptions of times past draw us toward dying, toward disintegration. The conceptions of the future drive us toward living forms, to incorporation, the action of assimilation. Hence all memory is melancholy, all premonition joyful. The former moderates excessive liveliness, the latter is uplifting for life that is too weak. The true reader must be an extension of the author. He is the higher court that receives the case already prepared by the lower court. It is not a sign of superior education and greater powers to justifiably find fault with a book. When receiving new impressions, greater sharpness of mind is quite natural.